Hi guys, hello. Today I will tell you the story of how the Olympic Games originated. We will travel back to ancient Greece, to a quiet valley filled with temples and olive trees, where athletes ran barefoot on sun-scorched earth, and crowds gathered under the hot summer sky to sing praises and seek the favor of the gods. If you enjoy falling asleep to these calm stories, you can leave a like and subscribe. Settle in comfortably. Let your shoulders relax. Close your eyes if you wish, and we shall begin. Long before anyone spoke of Olympic records, the inhabitants of Greece were already watching young men test their strength and courage. Before a crowd, there were no marble stadiums dedicated to Zeus yet, no lists of champions. There were only scattered communities along the rocky shores of the Aegean Sea. In that world, the body was not separated from faith or status. Being fast and strong meant defining your place in battle and how the gods looked upon you. If we start with the island of Crete during the Minoan era, we can see hints of what was to come. On the ruins of their palaces, bright paintings 3,000 years old have been preserved. Some of them depict something frightening and beautiful at the same time. A massive bull charges forward, while a slender human figure grabs its horns and performs a controlled acrobatic leap over the animal. Both men and women participate in these scenes. This was not just a game, but a ritual of bravery, where a single mistake could cost a life. If we move to the mainland, to the stone cities of the Mycenaeans, the love for competition persists. This is the world that the Greeks later remembered through stories of the Trojan War. In this world, preparation for war and preparation for games are close relatives. Boys grew up running through rugged hills and wrestling with each other. We find the clearest glimpse of this in epic poems. When Homer tells the story of Achilles and his friend Patroclus, he pauses the war itself to describe the program of funeral games held in honor of Patroclus. The clash of armies falls silent, and we find ourselves in the arena. Achilles sets out prizes and calls upon the leaders of the Greek army to compete. There are chariot races with sharp turns, running where the dust flies, wrestling that turns into long embraces of sweat and strength, spear throwing, and boxing that leaves faces bruised. The mood of these games is complex. Everyone grieves, but everyone wants to win. Men argue about fouls, boast, and haggle over prizes. Here, sport is a way to honor the dead and restore a sense of order among the living. For early Greeks, victory showed not only skill, but that fate or the gods were favorable toward you. Centuries later, when the Mycenaean world fell, Greece entered a long period of quiet. When history comes back into focus around the 8th century BC, we see a different landscape. City-states with their own laws and rivalries, but they are united by language, stories of the gods, and a new way of raising youth. In Greek cities, boys grew up combining physical and intellectual training. Gymnasiums and wrestling schools became common features of urban life. The word gymnasium itself comes from the Greek word meaning naked, because men trained without clothes. This was a sign of openness and equality. Imagine one of these places on a typical morning. The sun has just risen over the hills. A group of youths runs along the perimeter. Others practice wrestling moves. For them, these exercises are not just for health. They are for forming citizens who can fight in war, speak calmly in the public assembly, and carry themselves with dignity in public. In every community, the thirst to surpass a friend in running was natural. At the same time, Pan-Hellenic sanctuaries gained increasing importance. These were sacred places belonging not to one city, but to all Greeks. Delphi, Nemea, Isthmia. The idea of festivals, where people from many communities gather to honor a god and compete before his face firmly took root. Parents told their children that it is better to be brave than cautious. In these small spaces, the Greek idea of excellence was formed. Aret. This word does not mean physical strength alone, it means performing any task, as well as a human possibly can. In a society where politics and family disputes rarely led to clear results, the clarity of sport, whoever crossed the line first won, was incredibly attractive. So, before the first recorded Olympic Games, we already have a world where public competitions are part of cult and civic life. We have stories of heroes and gymnasiums where training takes place under the watch of elders. What we don't have yet is Olympia as the main stage. There is a quiet valley in the region of Elis, where locals worship Zeus at a sanctuary among the trees. But the festival has not yet taken its famous form. There is no four-year rhythm, and no official lists of winners. There is simply a growing sense that running and wrestling before the face of the gods is one of the most serious and joyful activities a human is capable of. From here, it is not a great leap to imagine how some local leader or a group of priests decided that their festival should become larger in scale. Perhaps they formalized the running track. Perhaps they established rules regarding who could compete. Perhaps they decided that only Greeks could participate, and that the event would be held on a regular schedule every 4 years. At some point in the 8th century BC, this is exactly what happens in Olympia. The festival, which was one of many, takes on a special role. From this moment, people will begin to count time in 4-year blocks from one game to the next. They will send their best athletes to compete there and return home with pride in case of victory. By the time the Olympic Games became famous throughout Greece, people already knew that no human story feels complete without an older story behind it. Simple facts were not enough. A simple explanation like, "We hold these races every 4 years because the elders once agreed it was a good idea," did not satisfy a culture that filled its nights with tales of gods, heroes, and strange events of the distant past. So the Greeks did what they almost always did when they looked at an important custom. They wrapped it in myth. They created a set of stories which said that the games were not just an agreement between cities, but a gift that came from the times of Zeus and from heroes whose names were already ancient. When the first historian picked up a stylus, if you travel in your imagination to the sacred grove in Olympia, during the times of classical Greece, you won't arrive at a bare sports facility. You will enter a place that feels heavy with stories. The air is thick with the smell of animals, incense, dust, and sweat. Somewhere nearby, someone is telling a group of visitors how this place first became holy. They stand near a low earthen mound, which is said to be the tomb of Pelops. They point to an altar belonging to an older god. They gesture toward the slopes encircling the valley and say that once, long ago, giants and gods clashed here. The stories don't always agree with each other. In fact, some of them openly contradict one another. But this is not a problem for the people who hear them. For a Greek listener, several truths can live side by side. A god might found the games in one story, a hero in another, and a semi-divine strongman in a third. What matters is not a strict sequence, but the sense that this festival is rooted in a deep and sacred past. One popular story begins at the very top of the divine family tree with Zeus himself. According to this version, the true origin of the games is nothing other than a war in the heavens. Zeus overthrew his father Kronos, who once ruled the Titans and the universe. The struggle is long and brutal. The younger god does not just walk in and take the throne. He must gather allies, withstand attacks, and prove that he is strong enough to carry the burden of ruling both gods and mortals. When the battle is finally over and Kronos is defeated, the world is no longer a place ruled by dark, heavy forces. It belongs to Zeus, who brings order and a more stable sense of justice. The story goes that in commemoration of this victory, Zeus comes to the valley of Olympia. There, in the place that would become his favorite sanctuary, he organizes a series of contests. The competitors in these first games are not men from Sparta or Athens. They are the gods themselves. Apollo, swift and graceful, runs against Hermes and wins. In another telling, he meets Ares in boxing and defeats the god of war. Poseidon might have taken part in horse racing. Hephaestus might have wrestled in some contest that suited his strength, and so on. The details change from one storyteller to another, but the picture is clear enough. Before humans ever lined up to run barefoot along the long track, the gods themselves set the pattern. The Olympic Games in this sense are a copy of a divine festival. When humans run, wrestle, or compete in chariots, they are repeating what their gods once did to celebrate the victory of order over chaos. This myth gives the games a cosmic importance. It says that running is not just running. It is a small echo of that first moment when the universe established itself under the rule of Zeus. For the people who traveled to Olympia and listened to a priest or guide tell this story, the effect would have been powerful. You are not just camping on a hillside in the heat. You are standing in the valley where Zeus once watched the contests of his fellow gods. The temple that now houses his great statue is a later work, but the ground beneath your feet feels older than any building. Another story shifts the focus from heaven to earth and from gods to a hero who, in the eyes of the Greeks, stands somewhere in the middle between mortal and divine. This is the story of Pelops, whose name is inscribed on the very map of Greece. The southern part of the country is called the Peloponnese, the island, or, rather, the peninsula of Pelops, though it is not actually an island at all. This name alone tells you how central a figure he was for the imagination of the people living in and around Olympia. If Zeus gives the games their place in the history of the universe, Pelops gives them a place in the history of this specific landscape. According to legend, Pelops did not begin his life in Greece. He came from across the sea, from a wealthy land in Asia Minor. In most versions, he is the son of Tantalus, a figure famous mainly for how deeply he offended the gods. Tantalus stole divine food and shared it with mortals, or, in another telling, attempted to test the gods by serving them a meal that included the flesh of his own son. As punishment, he suffers in the underworld, always standing near water he cannot drink and fruit he cannot reach. Pelops the son is restored to life by the gods and later leaves his troubled family behind. He travels west to seek his fortune in Greece. He arrives in a region ruled by a king named Oenomaus, who has a beautiful daughter named Hippodamia. Many young men want to marry her. The problem is that her father is not ready to give her away. Instead of saying no directly, he sets a condition that is equivalent to a death sentence. Any man wishing to marry Hippodamia must compete against Oenomaus in a chariot race. They start in the city and race all the way to the sanctuary of Poseidon by the distant sea. If the suitor wins, he gets the bride. If he loses, Oenomaus kills him. Before Pelops arrived, the story goes, many unfortunate lovers had tried and failed. Their heads, in some versions, were mounted above the king's door as a warning. Pelops realizes he cannot simply rely on his own driving skills. He needs help. Some versions of the story say that Hippodamia herself falls in love with him and agrees to help him. Others say that Pelops prays to Poseidon, who once loved him, and receives a chariot with horses that can run with the speed of the wind. In one of the most famous versions, Pelops bribes or convinces the king's charioteer, a man named Myrtilus, to sabotage Oenomaus' wagon. Myrtilus removes the key parts from the chariot, replacing the metal linchpins with wax ones. During the race, as the wheels spin and the heat from the axles builds, the wax softens. At the critical moment, the wheels fly off. The chariot crashes, and Oenomaus perishes. Pelops wins the race and the hand of Hippodamia. Here the story takes a darker turn. As often happens in Greek tales, Pelops might have promised Myrtilus a reward or a share in the kingdom. When the time comes, he instead throws Myrtilus into the sea. The dying charioteer curses Pelops and his descendants, casting a shadow over the family that would echo in later tragedies. But for the people of Olympia, the important part of the story is what Pelops does next. He is now the ruler of the region, to honor the memory of the dead king and perhaps ask forgiveness from the gods for the trick that killed him. Pelops organizes a large set of funeral games. They take place in the valley that would become Olympia. These funeral races, held in memory of Oenomaus and as a sign of gratitude to the gods, were remembered as the first edition of what later centuries would call the Olympic Games. You can still feel the presence of this myth in how the site was planned. Within the sacred enclosure at Olympia, there was a low mound called the Peloponnese, which was considered the tomb or sanctuary of Pelops. Sacrifices were offered there before the games. The hero was treated almost like a local god, a powerful spirit whose favor could make the festival successful. When athletes arrived to compete, they did not only pray to Zeus, they also honored Pelops. They made libations and sacrificed black rams at his mound. In the minds of those who believed this story, every chariot race on the dusty track was a faint echo of that first incredible contest between Pelops and Oenomaus. The third important story involves another figure who was a favorite throughout the Greek world, the strongman Heracles. To modern ears, he is often just a comic book hero or a figure from children's fairy tales, but to the Greeks, he was much more complex. He was the son of Zeus and a human woman, a man who suffered deeply and worked terribly hard to earn a place in the company of the gods. His famous 12 labors threw him into all corners of the Greek world. One of these tasks connects him directly to the region around Olympia. In this labor, Heracles is told to clean the stables of King Augeias of Elis. The work initially seems simple, but the king has vast herds of cattle, and the stables have not been cleaned for years. The filth and smell are unimaginable. It is a task designed to humiliate any ordinary worker and delay the hero indefinitely. Heracles, however, approaches the problem differently. Instead of digging with a shovel, he changes the earth itself. He diverts the channels of 2 nearby rivers so that they rush through the dirty stables, cleaning them out with one powerful flood. When he returns to Augeias to collect the promised reward, the king refuses to pay and even denies the agreement. In some versions of the tale, this leads to war. Heracles later returns with an army, defeats Augeias, and kills him. The spoils of this small war must be dedicated somewhere, and Heracles chooses Olympia. He takes part of what he won and brings it as a gift to Zeus. He marks out the territory for the sanctuary, builds altars, and institutes a festival with athletic contests in honor of his father. Thus, Heracles becomes the founder of the Olympic Games. Details vary in different accounts. Some authors say that Heracles measured the length of the stadium, the main race, by running it himself at full speed and then marking that distance as the official length of the track. Others say that he planted the first wild olive tree in Olympia, and that later generations used the branches of its descendants to make wreaths for the winners. People pointed to groves of trees and said they were planted by Heracles. They pointed to old, roughly built altars and said he had laid the first stones. To walk through Olympia with this story in mind was to feel the imprint of his hands everywhere. In some traditions, there even existed another Heracles, not the famous son of Zeus, but an older, more ghostly figure. It was said that this other Heracles belonged to a group of tiny mythical creatures, called the Idaean dactyls, who were associated with Mount Ida on Crete. These creatures were sometimes credited with the discovery of metalworking and other early skills. In one thread of the myth, it was they who first organized a race at Olympia, won by one of them, also named Heracles. He then declared that the race should be held regularly in honor of Zeus. Here, the games are the work not of a single god or hero, but of a group of ancient spirits connected to both Crete and the Peloponnese. This version allowed communities that trace their pride back to Crete to claim their share in the origin of the games. All these stories and others like them circulated simultaneously. Olympia was full of guides and priests who earned their living in part by telling them. A visitor from a distant city might hear the story of Zeus at one altar, the tale of Pelops at the hero's mound, and the version of Heracles at another sanctuary, all within 1 week. A more curious visitor might ask which one was true. A local might shrug and say they were all true in their own way. For a Greek listener, myth did not have to be a simple historical report. It was a poetic way to say what this place meant. Zeus made Olympia important in the history of the cosmos. Pelops made Olympia a royal center for the region. Heracles connected it with the long chain of his labors, as well as with the value of hard work and resilience. These stories also carried an unspoken message about what virtues the games were meant to demonstrate. Zeus, as the victor over Kronos, brought order and justice. Pelops, as a skillful racer, showed courage, intelligence, and also the danger of dishonor when he betrayed Myrtilus. Heracles reminded everyone that great strength without humility and respect leads to trouble, but also that perseverance and effort can elevate a person to the level of the gods. When young men arrived to compete in the stadium or in wrestling, they did so with these figures in the depths of their minds. They were not expected to match Heracles or become rivals to Apollo, but they were expected to show at least a trace of the same courage and integrity. From a practical point of view, these myths help tie the festival to the land and to the gods. In a Greece full of local sanctuaries and local contests, a place needed a special story to stand out. Olympia could not compete with Delphi as a place of prophecy, where Apollo spoke through a priestess. It could not match some cities in terms of wealth or political power. What it could claim was a direct link between its games and the older stories of the Greek world. This claim made it easier for distant city-states to send athletes and offerings. You weren't just going to some old match. You were going to the valley where Zeus celebrated, where Pelops competed, where Heracles labored. If we step back for a moment, we see how the myths and the real festival work together. The actual games likely grew step by step from local contests and sacrifices. Like many other Greek festivals, someone set a regular date. Someone recorded a list of winners. Someone decided that these races would be limited to free-born Greek men, and that they would be held every 4 years. This is the practical side. The myths then wrapped this practical agreement in a story that made it seem ancient and inevitable. A runner in the 8th century BC might never ask himself who first invented the Olympics. He would simply know that people had always run at Olympia in honor of Zeus, because that was how the stories were told. At some point, local scribes began to keep a careful list of those who won the main race. Later, historians would look back at these lists and decide that one specific year, a year we now call 776 BC, deserves to be called the first official Olympic Games. Associated with this date is a real person, a cook from the city of Elis, whose name is preserved to this day. The story of how the games crossed the line from legend to recorded history is where we will head next. There comes a moment in history when the mist of legend begins to thin, and we can finally see a date, a real name, and a race that actually took place. Until this point, the games belonged to Zeus, Pelops, Heracles, and the long memory of storytellers. Then suddenly, we have something much more precise. We have a year that later historians would treat almost the same way. Some people treat the year of a great revolution or a famous coronation 776 BC. For the Greeks writing about the Olympics, this year is an anchor. It is the first Olympiad they are willing to call official, the one they use when they begin to count time in 4-year blocks. It is not the beginning of everything, but it is the beginning of that part of history that feels solid beneath our feet. If you could have visited Olympia on the morning of those first recorded games, you would not have seen the polished stone stadiums of modern sports. You would have found a green valley between low hills in the region of Elis in western Greece. The air would have been heavy with summer heat. The Alpheus River would have moved slowly nearby, wide and brown, carrying dust and leaf scraps toward the sea. The sanctuary itself looked more like a sacred grove than a sports complex. Altars would be scattered about, some older and roughly built, others newer with fresh white plaster. A few temples might already have stood there, simple compared to what later generations would build. Everywhere you stepped, you would see evidence that this was primarily a place for the gods. Animals tied near altars, smoke rising from morning offerings, and small statues left by people who had come to ask for help or give thanks. The people who controlled this sanctuary were the Hellenes, a community whose lands surrounded Olympia. They believed they were the rightful guardians of Zeus' sacred valley. Local priests and officials handled the sacrifices and rituals. They also began to realize that the athletic contests held here during the festival could be something more than just a secondary act to religious ceremonies. As we saw before, Greeks everywhere were accustomed to local games. The idea of running or wrestling before a god was not new. What was new in Olympia was the decision to give this festival a regular rhythm. and keep an official record of who won. This decision transformed a local set of races into something with a much broader reach. We have no detailed account written on the spot in 776 BC. What we have comes from a later writer from the same region, a man named Hippias of Elis, who lived many centuries later, probably in the 5th century BC. Hippias was part historian, part fact collector, and part local patriot. He looked through old records, temple lists, and bits of oral tradition to compile a list of Olympic victors going back as far as he could. This list did not survive in its original form, but later authors like the scholar Pausanias and the historian Eusebius used and referenced it when they speak of the very first winner of the very first recorded games. This is where their confidence comes from. The name that appears at the top of this list does not belong to a king or a legendary hero. It is not Zeus, Pelops, or Heracles. It is a man named Cœbus of Elis. In some versions, his profession is recorded as a cook, which already gives the story a human touch. You can imagine him not as a distant marble statue, but as a real person, someone who spent part of his life in a smoky kitchen roasting meat and preparing food, and another part training his legs on the uneven tracks of the countryside. In the year that Hippias and others consider the first true Olympiad, Cœbus wins the only athletic event on the program, the short race, that the Greeks call simply the stade, named after the length of the track. The stade is a simple race, no turns, no complex rules about laps, no team strategies. It takes place on a straight strip of hard-packed earth that stretches from one stone line to another. The distance is approximately 180 to 200 meters, roughly what a modern runner can cover in a very fast sprint. At one end, the runners line up side by side behind a starting line made of stone blocks dug into the ground. At the far end, another stone marks the finish. There are no starting blocks, no starting pistols, and no numbered lanes. There is only a group of men, completely naked, as Greek athletes usually were, toes pressed against the line, arms hanging loosely at their sides, eyes fixed on the point where they must arrive. Some official, likely a local judge from Elis, gives the signal to start. Later writers say that false starts were punished, which suggests that, even in those early years, there was a concern for fairness and order. At the signal, the runners dash forward. It is all over in less than half a minute. Dust rises behind them, muscles strain, and faces contort in effort. The spectators, who at this early stage may be only a few hundred, shout for their favorites or simply shout to be part of the moment. When it is all over, one man crosses the line first. That man is Cœbus. The judges agree. The crowd sees it. Somewhere in the sanctuary, a priest records his name as the winner of the stade at the games in honor of Zeus. For the people standing there that day, it might have felt like a great race at a good festival, but not necessarily the beginning of a new era. No one is thinking in strict terms of chronology. They are thinking about the sacrifices, about local politics, about who brought the fattest cow for the altar, and which of their friends or cousins performed well on the track. The importance of the moment comes later, when men like Hippias and the historian Timaeus of Tauromenium begin to look back over the passing years and organize history. They decide that this specific festival, the one where Cœbus won, is the first games deserving of a solid date and a place on the list. They call it the first Olympiad, and then number every 4-year cycle that follows in order. This use of Olympiad as a timeline becomes one of the most distinctive features of Greek historical thought. Instead of saying something happened in a specific year BC, which is a modern way of counting, Greek writers would say that an event took place in the 3rd year of the 15th Olympiad, or that a famous battle occurred when so-and-so won the stade race at Olympia. Thus, the runner's victory becomes the point upon which other events hang. Politics, wars, and treaties are tied to the records of sport. If you think about it, this says something striking about what the games meant to the people who supported them. They trusted the regular rhythm of the festival to mark the passage of time. Every 4 years, regardless of how the cities argued, regardless of who was at war. The Olympic Games had to be held. The first few Olympia after Charybdis look very modest in the records. For more than a dozen cycles, the stade is the only event mentioned. This does not mean there were no other entertainments at the festival. Surely there were sacrifices, feasts, and perhaps informal contests in other skills. But in the official list, copied and polished by Hippias and his successors, only the winner of that one short race was worthy of record. These men become a chain of names left in memory, each tied to a single burst of effort on a hot day in Olympia. Many of them, like Charybdis, are from Elis or nearby cities. This makes sense. Travel is difficult, and news of the festival spreads slowly. At first, the games are a regional event, belonging to and shaped by the Hellens and their neighbors. Even in this simple early phase, rules and rituals already exist that give the festival a seriousness beyond a village fair. Before anyone runs, the athletes and judges gather around an altar, likely the altar of Zeus in the sacred grove. They place their hands on the cut parts of a boar that has just been sacrificed and swear an oath that they will play fair and that they have observed the necessary period of training. The oath is not a formal clause in a legal contract. It is a promise made before a god who, in the Greek understanding, pays close attention to such moments. To break it means incurring not only public shame but divine wrath. This belief gives the race a moral dimension. It is not enough to be fast. You must be fast and honest. The men who control the festival are called Hellenodikai, which simply means judges of the Greeks. At this early stage, they are drawn entirely from the leading families of Elis. They have a difficult job. I hope this dive into the history of the first Olympians has helped you relax. Would you like me to tell you more about how earth-breaking was punished, or how the first stone temples began to appear in Olympia? They must decide who can compete. They must maintain order during the competitions, announce winners, and award wreaths. Over time, this role becomes more formalized. The judges train for several months before the start, studying the rules and learning to recognize fouls in wrestling or false starts in running. The very existence of such training shows how quickly the games acquire a reputation. In need of protection. No one wants the Olympic wreath to be treated as a joke. To get to Olympia at all in the early period, an athlete has to make a real journey. There are no trains or smooth roads here. There are rugged paths, sea crossings, and days of walking. Most participants arrive on foot, carrying their small bags or traveling with a trainer and perhaps a servant. A few wealthier men might arrive on horses for riding or with servants carrying extra equipment. They flock to the valley a few days before the festival begins. They set up small camps under the trees or by the river. They test the track with light practice runs. They size up their rivals, exchanging glances and a few cautious words. Since the festival is still regional, many athletes may already know each other. A man from a city 3 valleys away has competed against them before in a smaller local event. The Hellens, who come every 4 years, are familiar faces. Nevertheless, even on this scale, there must be a feeling that Olympia feels different. The sanctuary has a wider reputation. Travelers who have been to distant cities bring stories about it. The priests speak with great authority. The stories of Zeus, Pelops, and Heracles, which we heard in the previous chapter, are retold around cooking fires at night, making everyone feel they have come to a special place, not just another fairground. During the festival, a kind of fragile peace is established in the region. At some point before the games, heralds from Elis travel throughout Greece to announce the implementation of the Sacred Truce. The idea is simple. For a specific period before, during, and after the festival, the roads to Olympia must be safe. Armies are expected to suspend their campaigns. City leaders are expected to guarantee that athletes and spectators can travel without being subjected to attack. In reality, not every war stops for the sake of the games, but the ideal exists, and it is taken seriously enough that even powerful cities usually respect it. For a few weeks, people who at other times of the year might be enemies find themselves standing side by side on a hillside, watching a race and cheering for one runner or another. The first official program remains remarkably sparse for some time. Only one race, one wreath, one name to add to the list. Nevertheless, there are constant small pressures pushing the festival toward growth. A strong runner who narrowly missed first place in the stadium might wish for a longer competition, where endurance matters more. A nobleman with fine horses might look at the open, level ground near the sanctuary and imagine chariot races there. Wrestlers and boxers, already testing themselves in city gymnasiums, might ask why their skills are not represented. Priests and local officials might see the benefit in attracting more visitors and offerings by adding variety. Slowly, during the 8th and 7th centuries BC, these ideas begin to change the shape of the festival. A second footrace is introduced, covering 2 lengths of the track instead of 1. Then a much longer race appears, forcing runners to circle the track many times and rewarding stamina. Wrestling and boxing find their place in the schedule. The pentathlon, a combined competition including running, jumping, discus, javelin, and wrestling, emerges as a way to crown the most versatile athlete. Horse and chariot races begin to thunder across the level ground of the hippodrome, next to the main stadium. Each edition brings with it new types of training, new strategies, and new names that people will remember. We will look at this expansion in more detail in the next chapter. For now, what matters is that the quiet decision to record Cobus's name and mark his year as the first Olympiad gives future Greeks a fixed point. From this point, they build a timeline. On this timeline lie the political battles of their city-states, the rise and fall of leaders, the slow progress of art and science, and that small but important fact that every 4 years, without fail, athletes compete in Olympia in honor of Zeus. The games cross from the world of legends into the world of records, and once they are there, they become something that can grow, spread, and ultimately hold together an entire culture for over 1,000 years. The first Olympic Games that we can date firmly were small and simple. One race, one winner, one wreath of olive leaves cut from a parched tree. This was enough to start a list that historians would later treat as the backbone of Greek chronology. But the people in Greece were not the kind to leave something important in a simple state for long. Once the festival in Olympia found a regular rhythm and a growing reputation, there was almost constant pressure to add something more. A longer race for men who were better at endurance than sprinting, a chance for wrestlers to show their skill, a place for horse owners to show off their teams. The Olympic Games began to grow not because of one single decision, but because of many small choices made over generations by priests, judges, athletes, and city leaders who all saw opportunities in this sacred valley in Elis. The first changes took place in the simplest area on the running track. For the first generations of Olympic participants, the stadium was the only competition that truly mattered. If you were the fastest sprinter on that one length of track, history would remember your name. However, it doesn't take long before people ask what would happen if the race were a bit longer. Perhaps there is a man who cannot beat the local champion in a short sprint, but who can maintain a fast pace for twice as long. At some point in the 8th century BC, a second race appears in Olympia. This one is called the double-length race Diolos. The runners line up at the same starting line, but instead of stopping when they reach the far stone marker, they turn around it and return to where they started. The burst of speed at the start is still important, but so is the ability to keep moving and handle the turn without losing balance. A few Olympiad later, another race is added for those who excel at long distances. The multi-lap race around the track Dolichos. Now the arena begins to echo, not just with the brief shout of the sprint, but with the slower, steady thud of feet as men circle the course again and again before collapsing at the finish line. Alongside these new races, other forms of competition that had long existed at local festivals begin to receive official positions in the Olympic schedule. Wrestling appears, bringing with it an entire culture of holds, throws, and tactics that men had practiced in city gymnasiums for years. The wrestling area in Olympia becomes a place where strength and technique are tested against each other before thousands of eyes. Boxers follow, their hands wrapped in leather strips that protect the skin, but do nothing to soften the blows. Their contests are slow and harsh. There is no structure of 3 rounds, no time breaks, only 2 men exchanging blows until one cannot continue or admits defeat. The crowd reacts with that mixture that Western spectators still know today. Part horror, part fascination, part admiration for people willing to undergo such punishment for the chance of a reef and a brief taste of glory. One of the most interesting additions is the event the Greeks call the contest of 5 the pentathlon. Someone, perhaps a priest wishing for a contest that would honor many forms of mastery at once, decides there should be a place for the athlete who is not the absolute best at one thing, but is very good at several. The pentathlon includes a short race, long jump, discus, javelin, and wrestling. To win it, a man must run fast, jump far, throw with precision and power, and survive a wrestling match at the end of a long day. This event quickly acquires a kind of noble status. Pentathlon winners are admired for balance and grace. Their bodies are viewed as the ideal form for an athlete. Strong but not heavy, lean but not fragile. Artists use pentathletes as models for statues of heroes and gods. The most dramatic change in the character of the games, however, comes with the introduction of horses. It is one thing to watch men compete on their own feet. It is quite another to see 4 horses together strike the starting line, their muscles tensed, heads tossed, pulling at the reins while the charioteers struggle to control them. At some point in the 7th century BC, Olympia adds chariot racing and horse racing to the program. The chariot race takes place on a long flat course, the hippodrome, laid out next to the main stadium. At each end, there are turning posts and room for several chariots competing side by side. The charioteers must steer their teams at full speed, round the posts without overturning, and avoid collisions with rivals. Accidents are common. Wheels lock together, chariots break, men and horses fall into a tangle that kicks dust and splinters into the air. Winners emerge splattered with sweat and mud, their horses foamy and shivering. The crowd roars at every sharp turn and near catastrophe. These equestrian events also change who can actually take part in the Olympics. Any free-born Greek of modest means can theoretically train as a runner or wrestler, if his city offers a gymnasium and if he has the time. But owning, feeding, and training a team of horses requires wealth. Chariot racing brings aristocrats and tyrants, the sole rulers of certain cities, into the heart of the festival. In the rules of the games, the winner of the chariot race is not the charioteer, but the owner of the horses. This means that a nobleman who never set foot on the track can be crowned an Olympic champion if his team finishes first. City leaders use this to build prestige. A victory in Olympia is the ancient equivalent of a world headline. It tells everyone that your city is rich enough to send horses and skillful enough to win. For many years to follow, inscriptions will record the names of men ruling cities and states who were proudest not of their laws, but of their chariot victories. As new events appear, the festival stretches out. What began as a brief celebration tied to a religious feast becomes a program filling several days. By the classical period, the Olympiad covers 5 days, each having its own character. The first day focuses on rituals and formalities. Athletes, judges, and city representatives gather before the statue of Zeus, place their hands on sacred objects or pieces of sacrificial meat, and swear to obey the rules and respect the truce. Lists of participants are read out. Sacrifices are made before the temples. This is also the day when disputes over eligibility are resolved. If any question arises as to whether a person is truly a citizen of a Greek city, or has committed some crime that should disqualify him from competing, that is when it must be raised and settled. The second and third days mostly belong to equestrian events, and some of the heavier athletic contests. In the morning, chariot races send clouds of dust into the air. The thunder of hooves, the creak of wooden wheels, and the shouts of charioteers fill the hippodrome. In the afternoon, spectators move to the wrestling or boxing area, where one-on-one matches unfold. One after another, the atmosphere becomes crowded and noisy. People jostle for the best view, argue loudly over judges' decisions, and support their favorite athletes just as fans support a football team today. Another day is dedicated to the pentathlon and religious ceremonies, which reach their peak in a grand sacrifice to Zeus. 100 bulls are led to the great altar. The smell of blood and meat mixes with incense and the constant dust of the packed earth. Parts of the animals are burned, as the gods share in the feast. The rest is cooked and eaten by the people. This day emphasizes a fact easily forgotten if one focuses only on sport. The Olympic Games are, first and foremost, a religious holiday. Every race, every bout, every throw is, in theory, an offering to Zeus, a way to please the king of the gods. Running disciplines, including the stadium, now take their place in a structured order alongside other contests dedicated solely to speed and agility. One race, for example, is conducted by athletes in full armor, with shields and in helmets. It is a strange mixture of sport and military training. The men must balance the weight of their gear with the necessity of a swift pace. The crowd adores this event because it speaks directly to the reality of Greek life. These are citizens who may one day stand in a battle line. To see how they handle armor on the track is more than entertainment. It is a kind of test. As the program grows, so does the audience. In the early days, the people standing on the slopes above the track were mostly from Elis and nearby regions. As news of the game spreads, visitors begin to arrive from more distant places. Men come from Sparta and Corinth, from Athens and Thebes, from islands like Rhodes, and from Greek settlements in Sicily and southern Italy. The journey is not easy. It involves long sea voyages and difficult roads, but the reward is the chance to see the best athletes in a shared space, and to take part in a tradition that now stands on the authority of many Olympiad. At some point in this growth, the Olympic Games begin to be described by a special word. They are called Panhellenic, meaning they belong to all Greeks. In practice, not everyone accepts this. There are feuds between cities, wars that break out despite the truce, and deep cultural differences between places that consider themselves more or less civilized. But the idea of a festival attracting participants from all corners of the Greek-speaking world becomes one of the defining features of Olympia. If your city can send an athlete to compete here, and if that athlete can win, you are part of a large family of people sharing the same gods, language, and values. The Olympic Games are not the only Panhellenic festival. Over time, 3 others gain prominence. In Delphi, sacred to Apollo, a set of games is held that combines music, poetry, and athletics. Near Corinth, on the Isthmus, another festival grows with its own list of champions in running and wrestling. In Nemea, a smaller but still respected series of contests in honor of Zeus takes place. These 4 gatherings form a cycle. Within 4 years, there will be at least one major festival in almost every season. Ambitious athletes travel from one to another, building reputations as serial winners. Cities that can afford it send teams and retinues to all 4, viewing them as opportunities for both athletic glory and diplomatic networking. Even in this crowded field, Olympia holds a special place. It is the oldest of the great festivals. It honors the supreme god. It has the longest list of victors. Its truce has become a standard part of the calendar. When Greek historians write about important events, they often date them by saying they occurred in the same year as a specific Olympiad. This habit keeps the focus on Olympia in a way no other festival can match. Victory here means more than victory at any other meeting. It is the supreme wreath an athlete can win in the Greek world. As the scale of the games grows, so does their political significance. City-states that once saw Olympia as a distant sanctuary now use it as a stage. Leaders arrive not only with athletes but with official messengers. They used the gathering of Greeks as an opportunity to make public announcements. Treaties are read aloud before the crowd and carved into stone that stands in the sanctuary. Alliances are declared here. Sometimes even declarations of war are made. Treasuries, small but richly decorated buildings intended to store offerings from specific cities, begin to appear along the processional routes. Each is built in the style of its home city and decorated with scenes celebrating victories in war or expressions of piety. Walking past them is like walking through a gallery of Greek pride. This political display is not always peaceful or tasteful. Cities compete with each other not only on the track but in the height of their treasuries, the richness of the offerings brought, and the boldness of the inscriptions carved. After important battles, victors sometimes dedicate armor, weapons, and captured items to Olympia. A visitor could see helmets taken from defeated soldiers hanging in a row, shields with inscriptions about which city defeated which enemy. The sanctuary becomes, in part, a museum of Greek conflicts. Nevertheless, even in these signs of rivalry, there is an underlying unity. All these armies, no matter how fiercely they fought elsewhere, recognize that this valley in Elis is a neutral space, set aside for Zeus and for sport. The growth of the festival also changes the small town of Elis itself. Every 4 years, the Hellens must host crowds that expand far beyond their usual capacities. They prepare the roads, ensure the water supply, and organize the logistics of feeding and housing the influx of visitors. For the residents of Elis, the Olympiad is both a religious duty and an economic opportunity. Merchants arrive with food, blankets, simple tents, oil for the athletes, wine for the celebrations, and countless small goods. Artisans set up shops to sell pottery, figurines, and tools. Poets and storytellers roam the grounds, offering performances for a fee or in the hope of attracting a wealthy patron. The games become a market of culture as much as of goods. For individual athletes, the expansion of the Olympic program and its growing fame changed the very notion of training. In the early days, a man could prepare for the stadium in his spare time, working his regular job. The demands of life left only a limited number of hours for running. As new competitions appear and the value of the Olympic wreath grows, some athletes begin to treat training almost as a primary activity. Wealthy families may support promising sons. Cities that want to raise their status may pay for training and exemption from regular work. Trainers travel from place to place, teaching new techniques and selling their expertise. By the classical period, a serious Olympic contender is someone who has spent at least 10 months of continuous preparation, following a strict program of diet, exercise, and rest. The oath taken in Olympia, which mentions this training period, is not a formality. It is a reminder of reality. To compete here means to dedicate a large part of your life to the attempt. Despite all these changes, the core essence of the experience remains simple. At the center of everything is still a person or a group of people on a patch of ground, trying to run faster, wrestle better, or drive a chariot more skillfully than others. The track is still a long strip of earth. The wrestling area is still a rectangle of sand. The hippodrome is still a flat field with posts at the ends. For most of the crowd, there are no grand stone seats. Most people still stand or sit on the grassy slopes. They endure the heat, dust, flies, and crowding for the sake of being present at the emergence of a new champion. For a modern listener, accustomed to perfectly organized broadcasts, it may be strange to imagine that the most prestigious festival in the Greek world involved so much discomfort. Nevertheless, ancient sources are clear on this matter. People came despite the hardships because the pull of the games was stronger than any concern about heat or the lack of shade. The Olympic Games, once a modest local celebration, had by this time become a fixed point in the lives of countless Greeks. Every child growing up in a city that sends athletes to Olympia hears stories of past champions. Every youth who enters a gymnasium for the first time for training knows there is a higher stage where his abilities may one day be tested. Every city leader thinking about how to raise the authority of his home imagines the moment when his runner, wrestler, or chariot will be crowned in Olympia, while heralds shout the name of the city loudly enough for the entire crowd to hear. If you imagine the ancient Olympic Games only as races and contests, you miss half of what made them important. For the people who actually traveled there, Olympia was not just a sports venue. It was a place where the gods were believed to live just a bit closer to the earth, where ordinary people could stand under the same trees and clouds that had seen Peloponnese race and the sacrifice to Heracles. The games were one part of a larger experience, a few saturated days in a quiet valley that for the rest of the year belonged to priests, caretakers, and the sound of the river. The valley itself is situated in the western part of the Peloponnese, in the land of Elis. The space is shaped by two rivers. The wider Alpheus flows past on one side, while a smaller stream, the Claudius, joins it nearby. Low hills rise gently on the site. One of them, a rounded height that the Greeks called the Hill of Kronos, towers over the entire sanctuary. When you approach Olympia on foot during the time of the classical games, you descend from a higher and more arid terrain into a lowland where the air feels heavier and more humid. You will smell the water and dust, animals and smoke long before you see the white forms of the temples among the trees. In the heart of Olympia lies the sacred enclosure, which the Greeks called simply the Altis, the grove. In early times, it truly was a grove, a space filled with plane trees, wild olives, and pines, marked by low walls and simple boundary stones. For generations, people filled it with human labor. Temples rose, altars multiplied, and statues thickened until the grove looked more like an open-air museum. But the idea of this place as a living, sacred forest never disappeared. When an athlete or visitor stepped into the Altis, they were expected to exercise a certain discretion in their behavior. Loud arguments and rowdy behavior were not welcomed. Sacrifices were made. Prayers were spoken quietly. The games might turn Olympia into a crowded hub every 4 years, but for the priests who lived here year-round, it was primarily the dwelling of Zeus. One of the oldest buildings inside the Altis was the Temple of Hera. It was a long, low structure with heavy columns, more ancient in style than the buildings that would appear later. Here, married women and local families brought their offerings to the Queen of the Gods. It was in front of this temple in later times that a flame, lit by the rays of the sun, would burn on a small altar of fire that burned in honor of Hera. Standing nearby were statues and offerings from cities that wanted to pay respect both to Hera and to the festival she shared with Zeus. For a visitor, this temple signaled that the sanctuary was not just a place for male athletes. It was a complex religious center with many cults living side by side. Even if the games themselves belonged mostly to men, however, the Temple of Zeus dominated everything. It was a later addition, begun in the 5th century BC, when the sanctuary had already become famous. It was built in a strict, simple Doric style with heavy fluted columns surrounding a central hall. Inside this hall stood one of the wonders of the ancient world, a statue that made visitors from distant lands catch their breath. The sculptor Phidias, already famous for his work in Athens, created a seated figure of Zeus over 12 meters tall. The god sat on a majestic throne, his skin fashioned from ivory plates, and his robe and ornaments made of gold. In one hand, he held a figure of Nike, the spirit of victory. In the other, a scepter topped with an eagle. The throne itself was decorated with carvings and inlays telling other myths. Lamps burned to keep the air dry and protect the ivory from damage. People who saw this statue left descriptions that sound almost like reports from another planet. They say that when you stepped inside the dim hall and your eyes adjusted after the bright Greek sun, you felt as if Zeus were truly sitting there, filling the space with his presence. The statue's head almost touched the roof. If the god stood up, one visitor wrote, he would have unroofed the building. The message of this work was not subtle. It stated that everything in Olympia, from the smallest local offering to the greatest athletic wreath, was under the gaze of Zeus. Competing here meant performing before that enormous, calm face, Scattered throughout the altis, many other objects were filled with deep meaning. There was the Peloponnese fenced mound marking the sanctuary of Pelops. There were altars to various gods, each with its own customs of sacrifice. Along the edges stood the treasury's small, but richly decorated buildings gifted by cities, such as Megara, Syracuse, and others to store their offerings. There were stone bases where statues of athletes, generals, and gods once stood. As you walked, your gaze would constantly shift between trees, columns, and representations of human and divine figures in bronze and marble. At the entrance to the stadium stood a row of bronze statues of Zeus called the Zanes. They were not paid for by ordinary donations. They were created with money from fines. Whenever an athlete was caught cheating, especially if he tried to bribe a judge or a rival, he was subjected to a severe penalty. The money went toward casting another statue of Zeus, which was then placed on a pedestal with a warning against corruption carved into it. To enter the stadium, every athlete had to walk past these stern figures and read the words below. The effect was deliberate. It reminded participants that their actions would be not only judged in the moment, but immortalized in metal and stone. The shame of being named on a pedestal for cheating in Olympia was something most men were unwilling to risk. Beyond the sacred grove, on flatter ground, lay the more practical parts of the complex. There was the gymnasium, a large courtyard surrounded by covered colonnades, where athletes trained in running and discussed throwing techniques. Nearby was the palestra, a smaller rectangular courtyard for wrestling and boxing training. In these spaces, a few days before the festival, athletes from many cities practiced their programs under the supervision of trainers and judges. They ran, jumped, wrestled, and repeated exercises in the dust, then cooled off in cold baths and rubbed their skin with oil and strigils to scrape away the sweat and dirt. Young men from different regions heard each other's speech with slightly different accents, and compared rumors about who might win in this or that competition. The stadium itself was simple in form, but when filled with people, it became one of the most intense places in Greece. It was carved into the earth just outside the altis. The floor served as a long, narrow running track framed by grassy slopes where spectators stood or sat. There were no stone stands for the majority, only the sloping ground. The judges sat on a raised platform near the finish line. At one end of the track was the starting line, a row of stone blocks sunk into the soil with grooves to guide the runner's feet. At the other end was the finish line, another stone marking the goal. The length of the track, the stadium, became a standard measure of distance in Greek life. On the day of the big race, the stadium filled early. Spectators crowded onto the slopes, finding whatever shade they could under small awnings or in the shadow of the hill. The heat could be brutal. Ancient authors mention clouds of dust kicked up by thousands of feet, and swarms of flies tormenting both humans and animals. Water was scarce. There were no comfortable seats, no easy exits, no quiet spots. Men jostled and argued for the best view. Some climbed higher up the slopes to see over the crowd, even if it meant standing under the blazing sun. Nevertheless, when the runners came to the line, silence usually fell. For a few moments, the entire valley seemed to focus on the strip of earth between the start and the finish, waiting for the judge to give the signal. The hippodrome, where the horse and chariot races took place, lay on the plain downstream. Today, almost nothing of it remains in the ground, but ancient descriptions give a clear picture. It was very long, with a central space for the races and markers at each end for turning. Spectators lined the sides or watched from embankments. Chariot races could include up to 40 teams at once, though not always at Olympia. The start involved a complex system to guarantee each team a fair chance when the signal was given. Once the race began, chaos reigned. Horses strained, charioteers shouted, wheels scraped against each other, and accidents happened frequently. The most dangerous spot was the turning posts, where a charioteer who cut the corner too close could overturn his chariot and bring down others. It was an event that made a powerful impression on those who saw it. The daily rhythm of the festival after the competitions began was a mixture of movement, and anticipation. At dawn, trumpets sounded, calling people to the first ceremonies. Athletes, judges, and representatives of each city walked in procession through the altars. They stopped at various altars to make offerings, then gathered before one of the main temples for the swearing of oaths. Priests sprinkled water over barley grains and threw them into the fire. The smell of fresh sacrifice reached the broad crowd, where merchants were already setting up stalls along the approach paths, laying out bread, cheese, figs, olives, and bowls of diluted wine for sale. Once the contests began, attention constantly shifted from one part of the sanctuary to another. A wrestling enthusiast might linger near the palaestra, watching match after match under the hot sun, and then hurry to the stadium when a rumor spread that the stadium final was about to begin. Traders and entertainers followed the flow, calling out their wares and songs. Storytellers found small clearings to perform tales from myth, or recite victory odes composed for past champions. Sculptors and painters, knowing that wealthy people gathered here, presented new works or discussed potential commissions. For a few days, Olympia became not only a religious center and a sports ground, but also one of the busiest markets in the Greek world. However, at the center of it all were the moments when religion and sport touched directly. The clearest example was the great sacrifice to Zeus. On the chosen day of the festival, 100 head of cattle were brought to the altar of Zeus. They were led in a row through the altars, decorated with ribbons and garlands. Flutists and singers accompanied the procession. Spectators crowded to see, knowing that the meat would later be shared among many of them. At the altar, priests examined the animals and sprinkled their heads with water, watching for signs of acceptance. Then, with a series of quick movements, they slit the throats and collected the blood. Parts of the thighs and the fat, considered the god's portion, were burned on the altar. Smoke rose into the sky and drifted over the sanctuary, carrying with it the smell of roasted meat. For an athlete standing in this smoke, the connection between his own efforts and the highest purpose of the festival could feel very real. He came not only to win a race, he came to participate in a complex act of devotion involving entire cities and countless families. If he won, the wreath placed upon his head was not merely a personal trophy. It was a sign that Zeus had recognized his efforts and for a moment had smiled upon his city. The crowds who came to Olympia did not all see the place in the same way. For a local farmer from Elis, the games might be an exciting event, a chance to sell produce and hear news from distant shores. For a Spartan, raised in a society that adored both discipline and competition, the festival might seem a natural extension of home training, an additional test before a wider audience. For an Athenian, used to debates and dramas, the sight of thousands of Greeks gathered together without weapons could be just as interesting as the contests themselves. For merchants from colonies in Italy or the Black Sea, Olympia was also a place for making contacts and assessing how closely they still felt to the old motherland. Women perceived the place differently. The rules of the games excluded married women not only from competing, but in principle from visiting the stadium on the days of athletic events. Young unmarried girls might be allowed to watch. There was also a separate festival in honor of Hera, with its own races for women, held at a different time of year. But during the men's games, the primary focus was on male bodies and male honor. However, there is a famous story of a woman named Ekecheiria, who disguised herself as a trainer to watch her son compete. When her son won and she climbed over the barrier in her excitement, her clothes caught, revealing she was a woman. The judges debated how to proceed. Executing the mother of an Olympic victor did not appeal to them, and they pardoned her, but they tightened the rules for future games. From then on, trainers, like athletes, had to strip naked so that no woman could sneak onto the field. The story shows how central the male world was in Olympia, and how hard women sometimes had to work to see a part of it. For those who came and endured all the conditions, the memory of Olympia often remained vivid for a lifetime. Ancient philosophers used the games as a way of explaining ideas. One writer described how people put up with the heat, crowding, and hunger just to see one race, and then asked his students what they would endure for a truly important spiritual goal. Another writer compared life to visiting the games. Some people, he said, come to trade and make money. Others come to compete. A few come simply to watch and understand. By using Olympia as a metaphor, these thinkers showed how deeply the festival had penetrated the common imagination. Between the contests, the sanctuary absorbed a constant flow of small personal rituals. An athlete who lost early on might come to an altar and offer a small animal or a handful of cakes, asking the god for better luck next time. A father who had just seen his son crowned might cut a lock of the young man's hair and dedicate it under a tree or at a shrine. A city delegation whose athlete had failed might still dedicate a bronze shield or vase, hoping the gesture of piety would matter, even if the result on the track did not. If you stood on the hill of Kronos and looked down during the peak of the games, you would see all these layers at once. The white outlines of the temples, the dark green foliage of the trees, and the glint of metal statues in the altars, the long strip of the stadium, with its shimmering line of runners or wrestlers, the dusty blur of the hippodrome further away, with small moving figures of horses and chariots, and it's all a ring of tents, stalls, fires, and people, tens of thousands of them, spread out like a temporary city that would vanish again when the festival ended. The miracle of Olympia lay in the fact that this temporary world continued to be reborn. Every 4 years, in the height of the Greek summer, the valley filled again with bodies, voices, offerings, and expectations. Then the crowd departed. The priests and caretakers remained with the statues and trees, keeping the fires burning and the stories alive until the next cycle. For them, this place was never empty. It was a space where the presence of the gods and the echoes of past games were always felt beneath the sound of the river and the rustle of the leaves. If you stood in the crowd at Olympia and watched the contests, sooner or later your gaze would settle on a single figure who moved a little lighter than the rest. There was always someone like that, a runner whose stride seemed fluid, while others strained, a wrestler who remained strangely calm, even a step away from defeat, a boxer who read his opponents from the first blow. It was such people the crowd remembered. It was their names that were carried home by merchants and storytellers. In every era of the games, champions rose from the dust of the stadium and became something more than just athletes. They turned into symbols of the best that the Greeks believed a human could be. To become such a champion, an athlete had to give much more than a few lucky days of effort. By the time the Olympic Games reached their classical form, the rules already assumed that a serious participant had trained for at least 10 months. This was not an empty promise. Athletes swore to this in the sanctuary. Before the games began, participants and judges gathered in one of the temples or before an altar, often in a building called the Bouleuterium, where official business was decided. A boar was sacrificed, and placing their hand on the sacrificial meat, the athletes promised that they had completed the necessary preparation and would obey the rules of the festival. In a world where it was believed that oaths before the gods had real consequences, this moment carried enormous weight. The training itself took place mostly in the athletes' hometowns. The strongest competitors usually arrived from places where sport was part of everyday life. Sparta, for example, raised boys in a system requiring constant physical effort. Croton in southern Italy became famous for its powerful wrestlers. To come from a city known for its champions was almost as important as being a champion yourself. In a typical Greek city, the gymnasium and the palaestra were the centers of male social life. An athlete would arrive there at dawn, rub his skin with oil, and begin his exercises. Runners cut laps, wrestlers practiced holds, and boxers trained with partners under the supervision of a coach. Diet was also part of the program. Some ate only meat, others bread, cheese, and figs. Coaches argued over the benefits of certain vegetables for endurance. For the talented, training became the primary activity, sponsored by wealthy families or the police themselves. What awaited the athlete at the end of this road looked modest on paper. The official prize in Olympia was a wreath of leaves from the wild olive tree, growing in the sacred grove. It was said that the tree was planted by Heracles himself. Judges cut the branches with a golden knife and wove them into simple wreaths. During the ceremony, a herald announced the winner's name and his city, and the wreath was placed upon his head. The crowd cheered, and friends embraced the hero. There was no gold or stones in this wreath. It could be held in one hand, and yet, the honor attached to it was so great that men were willing to risk health and life for a chance to wear it. The real rewards awaited the champion at home. In many cities, the Olympic winner entered not through the ordinary gates, but through a breach in the city wall. The message was clear. A city with such men does not need walls, its citizens are its defense. The winner rode in a chariot. He was showered with flowers, and the leaders of the Peloponnese gave speeches about how his triumph reflected the community's character. Material benefits followed: the right to free meals at public expense for the rest of his life, seats of honor at feasts and in the theater, monetary rewards, or land. Families proudly entered the title of Olympic victor into the lists of ancestors. For a man from a small town, victory in Olympia changed his social status forever. Famous names flew across the entire Greek world. One of the most celebrated was Milo of Croton, a wrestler from the late 6th century BC. Stories about him balance between fact and legend. They said he won in wrestling several Olympiads in a row. Rumors held that he could carry a full-grown bull across the stadium on his shoulders, and then eat it in a single day, or that he stood on an oiled disc, and no one could push him off. There is also Leonidas of Rhodes, a runner from the 2nd century BC who specialized in speed. He won 3 running disciplines at 4 Olympiads in a row, an incredible 12 victories, a record that remained unbroken for over 2,000 years. Later runners measured themselves by the memory of Leonidas. Not all victors competed in person. In chariot racing, the wreath went to the owner of the horses. This allowed even women to win titles. The most famous was Cyniska of Sparta. She raised and trained a team that twice won the 4-horse chariot race. Her success sparked debate. Some saw it as proof that a woman could find a path to glory. Others considered her an exception. Honor in Olympia lay not only in victory, but in how you pursued it. The idea of fair play was deeply woven into the festival structure. The athlete's vow included a promise not to use bribery or tricks. The judges, Hellenodikai, strictly monitored the rules. Punishments for violations were severe, from flogging and disqualification to enormous fines, which paid for the casting of bronze statues of Zeus. These statues, with the names of the offenders, stood at the entrance to the stadium as eternal shame for the families and cities. This was meant to balance the great honor of victory. The Olympic truce also carried moral weight. The news that enemies could set aside their shields for a few days and cheer together for an athlete showed that the games stood above conflicts. This did not mean wars ceased forever, but for a brief time, another priority became more important. At the same time, the rules about who could attend reflected that society's boundaries. Only free-born Greek men could compete. Foreigners, slaves, and married women were excluded. The punishment for a married woman appearing at the stadium during competition days was death. She was to be thrown from a cliff, though it is unclear if this was applied in practice. There was the story of Cleopatra, who disguised herself as a trainer to see her son's success. She was spared as the mother of a champion, but rules were tightened afterward, forcing trainers to strip as well. For those who endured the heat and overcrowding, the memory of Olympia remained for a lifetime. Philosophers compared life to visiting the games. Some come to trade, others to compete, and a few simply to watch and understand. By using Olympia as a metaphor, thinkers showed the depth of its penetration into the imagination. Even if an athlete lost, he offered a sacrifice, hoping for luck in the future. Looking from the hill of Kronos at the peak of the holiday, one could see the white temples, the greenery of the grove, the dust of the hippodrome, and tens of thousands of people spread out like a temporary city that would vanish. as soon as the festival ended. Even within the existing restrictions, the games allowed for a mixing of classes that was impossible in everyday life. A fisherman from a small island could line up on the track next to a nobleman from a large city, and if he ran faster, he was crowned the winner. The outcomes of wrestling and boxing matches were decided not by origin, but by performance before the crowd. Judges did their best to ignore sympathies for their own players when announcing winners. Spectators did not always share this discipline, and brawls could break out in the stands. But the ideal of equality was present in Olympia during those few days. The main question was not who your father was, but whether you could run, throw, or fight better than another trained man. Stories of victories did not end with the festival. They were captured in words and images that spread the Olympic spirit throughout Greece. The most detailed records, those very lists of victors we mentioned, were kept by local scholars and priests, but more vivid and emotional versions came from poets. Among them, Pindar stands out. In the 5th century BC, he composed complex odes in honor of Olympic and other Pan-Hellenic victors. A wealthy family or city would pay him to write a poem glorifying their champion. Pindar wove the story of victory into myths of gods and heroes, emphasizing that the champions stood in a long line of noble figures. These odes were performed with music before audiences who might never have seen Olympia in person. Hearing them, people far beyond Elis could feel part of the excitement and pride the games provided. Artists sculpted and cast statues of victors that stood both in Olympia and in their hometowns. Some depicted the athlete at the moment of effort, muscles tensed, body twisting in a throw or leaning into a sprint. Others showed him standing calmly with a wreath or a palm branch, the symbol of victory. Inscriptions on pedestals often included short verses stating who he was, where he came from, and in which contest he won. A visitor walking through a city decades after a specific games could still see in bronze or stone the faces and forms of men whose speed or strength once delighted the crowd in Olympia. For the champions themselves, life after victory could turn out differently. Some retired at the peak of their fame, returning to their city to live as honored citizens, perhaps holding public office or working as coaches for the next generation. Others continued to compete, moving from one festival to another and collecting a string of titles. A few discovered that success brought both problems and rewards. Their cities might expect constant new victories. Rivals might resent their special status. Stories survive of champions who overestimated their strength and lost at the end of their careers, facing the cold silence of a crowd that once applauded them. The same stage that made a man famous could witness his decline. Nevertheless, for most Greeks, the figure of the Olympic victor remained a positive image. He embodied several values at once: physical perfection evident in the body, courage shown in the readiness to step onto the track or into the ring where everyone could see your victory, or defeat, discipline, the long months of training hidden behind a short burst of public performance, and a sense of connection to the divine. Because victory in Olympia was officially considered a sign that Zeus had favored you that day. When parents told their children to work hard and face challenges without fear, they often pointed to Olympic champions as an example. The games did not turn every athlete into a saint. There were cheaters and boasters, men who started fights outside the ring or used their fame for selfish ends. But the structure of the festival, from the oath given before the contests to the statues of shame at the stadium gate, tried to direct the culture of sports toward honesty and honor. This effort, however imperfect, is part of what people think of when they talk about the Olympic spirit. It wasn't just about who ran the fastest, it was also about how a community wanted to see itself reflected in the bodies and choices of the men standing on the track. For more than 1,000 years, the Olympic Games returned to the Valley of Olympia like a tide that never fails. Empires crumbled, cities burned, new philosophies formed. But every 4 years, men still gathered to run on the same strip of earth and wrestle in the same dust. This resilience makes their end feel almost sudden, It did not come in one dramatic moment with the sound of trumpets and a formal announcement that the games would be no more. It came slowly, as the world around Olympia changed, and the old gods lost their grip on the minds of men. The first big change was the arrival of Rome as the dominant power in Greece. When Roman armies conquered Greek cities in the 2nd century BC, they brought a new political order. But they did not immediately sweep away the Greek festivals. In fact, many Roman leaders admired Greek culture. They studied its literature, copied its art, and attended the games. Olympia lived on. Roman citizens traveled along the same dusty roads used by early Greeks, eager to see the famous races and worship in the temples. Some emperors gave money to repair buildings and add new structures. Under the protection of these patrons, the sanctuary acquired fresh marble and new treasures. At first, it might have seemed that Roman rule would actually strengthen the festival. However, Rome also brought a different style of public spectacle. In Italian cities, people flocked not to simple dirt tracks, but to stone amphitheaters to watch gladiator fights and wild animals attacking criminals. The taste for spectacles filled with blood and noise grew. Against this backdrop, the more restrained contests in Olympia could begin to look old-fashioned. Some Roman emperors tried to make the Olympics more theatrical, adding events that suited their own interests. Nero, ruling in the 1st century AD, is the most famous example. He loved music, acting, and self-admiration as much as power. When he traveled through Greece, he participated in several festivals as a competitor in singing and chariot racing. At Olympia, he insisted on driving a chariot with 10 horses, lost control and fell during the race, yet still forced the judges to declare him the winner. After his death, Greek officials quietly erased his name from the list of Olympic victors. This incident shows how the dignity of the games could bend when imperial ego clashed with tradition. As centuries passed, pressure on Olympia changed again. The Roman Empire faced invasions, economic strain, and internal conflicts. At the same time, a new religion spread through its cities and lands. Christianity preached a very different view of the gods and what constitutes proper worship. For Christian leaders, the sacrifices of pagan temples were not harmless old customs, they were acts that had to stop. Statues of Zeus and Hero were not works of art to them, but idols. The athletic contests that glorified these gods, especially when they included public nudity, and celebrations that could become rowdy, were not things they wanted to support. Among modern historians, debates continue as to exactly when the last ancient Olympic Games took place, but the key period is the end of the 4th century AD. Emperor Theodosius I, a staunch Christian, issued laws against pagan cults. Temples lost imperial funding. Public sacrifices were banned. In this atmosphere, a festival built entirely around the worship of Zeus could not flourish. Even if there was no single decree stating in direct words that the Olympic Games were now illegal, the support that had maintained them for so long was withdrawn. Without this foundation, and with fewer and fewer people willing to travel to a pagan sanctuary, the cycle finally broke. The year came when the heralds of Ulyss did not set out on their journey. The valley fell silent. The stadium became overgrown with weeds. For Olympia itself, a long period of silence followed. The great statue of Zeus was taken away, likely to Constantinople, where it later disappeared, possibly destroyed by fire. Earthquakes shook the region. Rivers changed their courses, flooding the site and covering the ruins with silt and sand. Villages appeared and disappeared nearby, but the exact location of the old stadium and temples was erased from common memory. For many centuries, the Olympic Games survived only in books. Ancient authors described them in detail. Scholars who could still read Greek copied these texts in monasteries and private libraries. They knew there had once been a valley where men ran for an olive wreath, and where cities agreed to a truce to send their best representatives, but they could not point to the exact spot on a map. It was only in the 18th and 19th centuries that European travelers and archaeologists, armed with old texts and a new curiosity, began a serious search for ancient Olympia. They followed descriptions of rivers and hills, dug into the layers of earth, and slowly uncovered the outlines of the Temple of Zeus, the Temple of Hera, the Gymnasium, and finally, the stadium itself. The long earthen track emerged again, the same distance it had been when Coroebus ran across it. Stone starting lines came to light once more. The valley that had once fallen silent became busy again, this time with scholars, workers, and tourists instead of athletes. The rediscovery of Olympia did more than just satisfy curiosity. It helped ignite an idea. If the ancient Greeks once gathered here from many cities to compete without weapons, could modern nations do something similar? At the end of the 19th century, a Frenchman named Pierre de Coubertin and his allies answered this question. By creating the new Olympic Games, they chose Athens for the first modern festival in 1896. When runners stepped onto the new track and spectators filled the new stands, they were not recreating the ancient games in every detail. The rules were different. The world had become larger, and athletes arrived from many cultures, including women who were once barred from the old stadium. Nevertheless, the name they chose and the ceremony of lighting the flame in Olympia before every modern games show that the shadow of the ancient festival still stretches through time.